Diane had been putting the conversation off for as long as she could, but she knew she couldn't delay it any longer. With her husband Jack out for the evening with friends, it felt like the only opportunity she would get. Taking a steady breath, she stepped outside into the crisp autumn air and walked across the yard toward the small studio apartment tucked behind the garage, the space where their live-in housekeeper stayed. Lost in thought as she rehearsed what she wanted to say, Diane pushed open the door without knocking. The moment the door swung open, she realized her mistake. It was still early in the evening, barely an hour after Doris had finished her work for the day. She had been relaxing in front of the television, her housekeeping uniform already removed. Startled, Doris leapt up with surprising speed for a woman of her size. Diane quickly looked away as Doris pulled her robe around herself and tightened the silky sash. But the brief moment had already revealed more than Diane intended to see. Doris had been wearing a long-line bra and a firm panty girdle, the kind of shapewear older women often relied on. Diane had noticed before that Doris was filling out more than she used to, but seeing her like this made it much more obvious. Her figure had grown rounder, softer, unmistakably feminine, with a heavy bust and wide hips that gave her the appearance of a comfortable, matronly woman. The transformation still startled Diane, sometimes. Without the structure of the garments she usually wore, Doris looked older than her years. Though they were actually close in age, Doris appeared a decade older, partly because of the extra weight she had gained and partly because of the grandmotherly hairstyle she now favored, a full, permed bob that completed the image. Diane knew the truth, of course. Yet standing there, looking at the woman in front of her, it was difficult to connect this frumpy housekeeper with the man she had once been married to. "I'm so sorry, Doris," Diane said quickly. "I should have knocked." Doris only nodded, her cheeks flushing beneath her makeup as she lowered her gaze. The embarrassment on her face made Diane feel even worse for barging in like that. Doris murmured something quietly, but Diane hadn't caught it. "I'm sorry," Diane said gently. "I didn't hear you." "I said, you don't have to call me that when we're alone," Doris repeated, her voice still soft. "Actually, Diane, I'd rather you didn't." Diane hesitated. "I understand what you mean," she said slowly. "But honestly, it just feels strange calling you anything else now. You really do look like a Doris." Doris absorbed the comment silently, giving a small nod. "And besides," Diane continued, "it's safer if we stay in character all the time. If we slip up even once, someone might start asking questions. Neither of us wants your secret getting out." "Secret identity," Doris said with a faint, weary chuckle. "You make it sound like I'm some kind of superhero." "More like a super housekeeper," Diane replied without thinking. The joke fell flat the moment she saw Doris's shoulders slump slightly. "I'm sorry," Diane said quickly. "I didn't mean that the way it sounded." "I know," Doris replied quietly. "To be safe," Diane continued, trying to regain her footing, "I'll keep calling you Doris, and you should keep calling me Mrs. Lang. Just like always." Doris lowered her eyes again. "Yes, Mrs. Lang." For a moment Diane studied her more carefully. It struck her how easy it had become to forget who Doris once was. In the house, Doris was a whirlwind of constant activity, cooking meals, cleaning rooms, doing laundry, grocery shopping, fixing small things around the house. Over the past year, Diane had grown completely used to relying on her. Jack's shirts were now pressed and washed at home. Dinner was always prepared. Even on her day off, Doris would prepare meals in advance, so the family only had to reheat them. From scrubbing floors to mending clothing, Doris handled every chore that kept the household running smoothly. And she did it so well that Diane had gradually stopped thinking about the past at all. But now, looking at her again, Diane couldn't help wondering what effect the situation had truly had on Will, the man Doris had once been. He had once been a confident professional with an impressive education and a career in marketing. Yet now he spent his days cleaning kitchens and folding laundry while pretending to be an older woman with little education. Somewhere along the way, the line between pretending and becoming had begun to blur. The padded undergarments that had once created Doris's figure were no longer necessary. Over time, his body had changed naturally, softening and reshaping until the curves were real. Diane had never meant for any of this to go so far. Despite their divorce, she had still cared about Will. When he had called her in desperation after losing his house and business to tax problems, he had been completely out of options. She couldn't offer him money, and she knew her new husband Jack would never agree to helping her ex financially. But there had been the empty apartment behind the garage, the one intended for a future housekeeper. And that was when Diane had suggested the unusual solution. If Will could convincingly pass as a woman, as their housekeeper, he could stay there temporarily until he got back on his feet. At first, she had assumed he would refuse. Instead, desperation made him agree. With a small amount of her savings, Diane helped him create the disguise: realistic undergarments, secondhand clothes, a new hairstyle, makeup, and a complete transformation. When she first saw the finished result, she had been shocked at how convincing it looked. "You look like an older version of your mother," she had exclaimed. Will hadn't liked hearing that, but it was true. At first, the hardest part had been his behavior and voice. Diane had encouraged him to speak as little as possible until he could adjust. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. What was supposed to be temporary gradually became permanent. The housework left him with little time to search for a new job, and the longer he lived as Doris, the harder it became to return to his old life. Eventually, Diane had taken the deception even further to protect the secret. Now, standing in the doorway of that small apartment, Diane realized how completely things had changed, far beyond what she had ever originally imagined. Diane watched quietly as Doris stood before her, still shaken from the conversation. For a moment, she wondered whether she had been too harsh, but the thought passed quickly. The situation had gone on far longer than either of them had ever intended. "Doris?" Diane said firmly. "Yes, Mrs. Lang," Doris answered automatically. "I think we both believed this arrangement would only last a short time," Diane began. "But it's been nearly 3 years now. And instead of getting back on your feet and moving on, you've become, well, a permanent part of this household." She paused, softening her tone slightly. "Not that I'm complaining. Honestly, I doubt we could ever find a better housekeeper than you." "Thank you, Mrs. Lang," Doris said quietly. "You're dependable, hardworking, and thorough," Diane continued. "Any family would be lucky to have someone like you." Doris swallowed hard. For a moment, Diane wondered if Doris somehow already knew what was coming. She dismissed the thought almost immediately. She had been extremely careful not to let anything slip. "Mrs. Lang?" Doris asked hesitantly. "Yes, Doris? What made you say any family would be lucky to have me?" Diane sighed. Even though Doris often acted slow or simple in her daily work, she could still be surprisingly perceptive. "Well, now that the children are all away at college, Mr. Lang and I have been thinking about the future," Diane explained. "We've decided to sell the house and take a long sailing trip, a year traveling around the world." The words seemed to land heavily. Doris's eyes widened, and she instinctively clasped her hands to her chest. What about me?" she asked softly. Diane shifted uncomfortably. "You know we care about you," she said. "Jack does too. The kids always liked having you around. You've become almost like part of the family." The irony of the statement did not escape her. Doris was, in truth, the children's biological father, something none of them could ever know. "And, of course, we thought about your situation while making our plans," Diane continued. She cleared her throat. "Do you remember my friend Michelle?" "Yes, Mrs. Lang. I served lunch when she visited last week." "That's right. Well, she's recently divorced," Diane explained quietly. "Her husband left her, and now she's raising 4 children by herself while working full-time." "I see," Doris replied flatly. "She's been spending a fortune on babysitters," Diane went on. "More than once she said she wished she could find someone dependable to help with the house and the kids." Diane forced a reassuring smile. "I told her about you, about how capable you are. When I mentioned you might soon be available, she was thrilled." Doris didn't react. The silence made Diane nervous, so she kept talking. "She has a very nice apartment above her garage where you could live. It's actually bigger than the one you have here. And her children are wonderful. Cody is 2, Kylie is 4, and the twins, Sean and Paul, are 7. Still nothing. She really needs someone she can rely on, Diane said quickly. And she's even offering to pay you more than you earn here. That way you can start putting some money aside. Doris remained completely still. Then suddenly she collapsed to the floor in tears. The sound of her sobbing filled the small room. Diane felt a painful knot twist in her chest. Part of her wanted to kneel beside Doris, wrap her arms around her, and offer comfort. After all, many years ago this had been the man she loved, the father of her children. But another part of her hardened. This situation, she reminded herself, had not been forced upon him. She had offered help when he had nowhere else to go. What had started as a temporary arrangement had simply stayed that way. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, Diane said stiffly, but this might actually be the best thing for you. Doris's sobbing gradually quieted, though she remained curled on the floor. You need to build a life for yourself, Diane continued. Your own life. What kind of life can I have like this? Doris burst out bitterly. Diane's patience snapped. That's up to you, she replied sharply. You can keep pretending this is temporary, or you can accept that this is your life now and move forward. Doris stared at her in disbelief. Are you serious? She muttered. Doris. Diane snapped. The reprimand hit its mark immediately. Doris lowered her head. I'm sorry, Mrs. Lang, she said quietly. Let's be clear about something, Diane continued coldly. You came to me asking for help, and I did everything I could. I gave you a place to stay when you had nowhere else to go. I protected your secret and risked my own family to do it. Doris nodded silently, ashamed. The truth is, Diane said bluntly, you failed at your old life. But here, in this role, you've been excellent. Doris said nothing. Look at this place, Diane added, glancing around the small apartment. It's decorated like a grandmother's sitting room. You've settled into this life completely. She watched Doris carefully. For heaven's sake, stand up, Diane ordered. With some effort, Doris rose to her feet. Good, Diane said. Now, let's talk about reality. She gestured toward Doris. The chances of undoing all of this and going back to who you used to be are very small. I'm not judging. I'm just being honest. I understand, Mrs. Lang, Doris said softly. Mr. Lang and I have discussed your future, Diane continued. And we decided we'd like to help you make a fresh start. Doris frowned slightly. I don't understand. To work anywhere outside this house, Diane explained, you'll need proper identification. Documents proving you are Doris, a social security number, driver's license, records, everything. But how could I ever arrange something like that? Doris asked helplessly. You couldn't, Diane replied bluntly. That's why I took care of it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a large manila envelope, handing it over. Doris opened it slowly and looked inside. Her hands trembled as she examined the documents. Doris, Kausk, she murmured numbly. Yes, Diane said. It wasn't possible to keep the exact last name you've been using, but it's close enough that no one will question it. She folded her arms. From now on, Doris Kausk is officially who you are.